Tonight, the shock fall of the Woolworths boss, Brad Banducci, the man who banned Australia Day and drove up food prices. Let this be a lesson to all woke CEOs, and arrogant ones too. We'll point out exactly what he did wrong. Plus, shocking video of another attack on a Jewish man by pro-Palestinian protesters in Melbourne. And I'll show you who the police then arrested. Something sounds familiar here. Also tonight, a voice from the grave. What Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny told us to do if Russian President Vladimir Putin did indeed murder him. And the most ridiculously woke thing I've heard all year, a top science journal blames our disgust with cannibals on racism and says it's all a plot, maybe for whites to get blacks under their control. Good God. But first, the spin today was incredible, and it started a bit of a stunt, the Prime Minister acting like Santa Claus in a way the governments actually do like to do. You know, here's this great and generous Prime Minister giving away tickets, this time to Taylor Swift's Sydney concert to some Nova listeners. Tickets he hadn't actually paid for himself, he hadn't worked for, tickets he just got handed by someone else.
I'm calling to give you the news, which I reckon is pretty good news, that you have won tickets to Kate's Sweet Seats. You're off to Taylor Swift. Wow, you've got on Taylor. How good is that? Fantastic. How long have you been trying to get the tickets for?
Like crazy. I spent probably 50 hours just watching Ticket go round and round. Thank you so much.
Perfect example of how governments work. Politicians playing with other people's property, giving away stuff that someone else actually had to provide. But there was other spin today. Real wages finally have gone up for the first year in almost 3 years.
Real wages growth is back in our economy even sooner than we expected. This means that Australians are earning more, and because of our tax cuts, they will keep more of what they earn.
And it's true, the growth in wages in the past year was finally higher than the growth in inflation by a massive 0.1%. Well, think of it perhaps like this. Your wages might have gone up, let's say $2,000 more this year. Beauty. And this time inflation took only $1,980 of those $2,000, leaving you, do the maths, with $20 up on the year, $20. Don't spend it all at once. And you won't. Because here's the spin. Real wages went up by the tiniest amount. So why are you actually feeling poorer? Well, check this out. It's because you have the money you've got left over to spend has actually crashed, says the Bureau of Statistics. What's called your disposable income has gone backwards by more than 6% over the year. The worst result in the OECD, the richer countries around. And that's because this disposable income is what's left after the government has also taken tax off you, which is more than ever because of bracket creep, and the rise in mortgage interest rates. That's really cut the money left in people's hands. And I'll tell you something else that's cost you. Those green lies by global warming extremists in this very same government. Or indeed in my local idiot council, Mornington, like Steve Price said on the show last night. It's now announced it's got a great plan to reduce energy costs for me and my neighbours. But by reduce energy costs, it actually means it will increase our rates, make our electricity even more expensive de facto if we don't buy solar panels for our roofs. Now, Bowen, our Federal Climate Change and Energy Minister, has tried the very same trick himself to force us to buy more electric cars. Like this one, that costs more than $100,000, just right for any tradie, right? $100,000. And to do that is impose a new vehicle emissions standard, which he claims will save about $1,000 per year per car. Whoopee-doo, but it's again a con. I think Bowen actually has no idea what save actually means, because the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries estimates this U-tax is going to instead drive up the price of our most popular car, the Ford Ranger, by $6,000. And the Liberals reckon the Toyota Land Cruiser, that's going to be $25,000 more. Now, this new U-tax is going to do that by putting a cap on the total emissions of all the cars each car company sells and then ratcheting it down, to get cuts down the track. And that is to force these companies to sell more electric cars and fewer cheap gassy models so they don't go over their cap, because then they'll have to pay essentially fines. So if you're actually going to then buy, say, one of these electric cars that Bowen wants you to get, well, more fool you, because it's not just much more expensive to buy or to insure or to fix. Car Expert recently drove 2 top-of-the-range BMWs, one electric, one petrol, from Melbourne to Sydney, and found not only did the electric version actually cost an extra $70,000 to buy, it also needed 2 hours more on this trip to recharge. The petrol car didn't need to stop once. And it cost $17 more to charge the electric car for the trip than it did to fill the petrol car. It was actually more expensive. And it's this kind of green fakery that's also helping to make us all poorer too. So, standard of living is going down, not up. And it's time you called out the spin of the politicians trying to hide that fact. But better news today, well, maybe for those of us into Schadenfreude. Woolworths boss Brad Banducci has quit quite suddenly, abruptly. He says, oh, no, I haven't been forced out. Heavens no, it was simply time for someone else, and that time had to be right now, quick. But that timing sure does make him look a loser, and it's a warning to the woke bosses out there who've been too arrogant for too long. Well, right now, shoppers are dancing on Brad's grave.
What would you like to see the new boss do?
Look after their customers more. And, go down and stop ripping us off.
I just hope it makes it more, friendly for us normal people who do shopping, rather than going into all this political stuff as well.
More affordability for your young families.
Yeah.
To not keep scamming people and to have fair pricing and actually pass on what the consumers are paying to their providers as well.
I can understand their anger. I mean, Banducci is the man who had Woolies promote Labor's voice, pushed it on shoppers, and then banned Australia Day. No posters, no Australia Day merch. And then what about its prices? Now, Woolworths' latest results this week shows actually increased its profit margin on food sales to 6%. That's double the margin that the 2 biggest food retailers in Britain make. Double. So there are now 2 inquiries into alleged supermarket price gouging going on, one by Senate committee, one by the competition watchdog. And I reckon that's rattled Banducci, because and plus he's still arrogant though. He turns up, I reckon he ignored advice, right, to shut up. He instead thought, well, I'll go on the ABC Four Corners show and make them, because I'm pretty smart, see all this my way. Instead, they asked him a few questions, he lost his rag, he got rude, and he stormed out.
Sorry, the former head of the Competition Commission says his words are that
retired,
we have...
by the way.
I don't think you would impugn his integrity and his understanding of competition law.
I'm just saying the world has got much more competitive.
He retired 18 months ago. He's not...
Okay, can we take that out? Is that okay? I mean, he is retired, but I shouldn't have said that, Angus. Are we going to leave it in there if we are?
Well, I mean, we're on the record. You said it. I mean, let's move on. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I'm done, guys. I do this with good intent. I don't do this with bad intent. No.
You're walking out, really?
No. Can we just talk to Brad for a sec?
The media guy, they're freaking. Joining me are Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Labor leader Bill Shorten, now Director of GXO Strategies, and Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer. Now, Michael, of course, Banducci actually did a great job for Woolworths shareholders. It made them a lot of money, but the way he's left has cost them a lot of love.
Well, that's true, Andrew. But look, I don't blame the CEOs or the companies here. The issues about competition policy and, inquiries by the government, or the parliament, are not going to solve this problem. And in fact, I thought the most extraordinary thing, other than that terrible media performance, was the comments from the CEO from Coles, who made some claim that because we had a third of the population and 30% more of the footprint, that somehow they should be making more profits. I mean, that's an argument for their costs to be higher and there'd be lower profits. So we've fundamentally got a problem with competition, and the government needs to address it. And I think the stuff they've got to look at is, zoning and all the barriers to entry for other supermarkets. In terms of, the Woolworths CEO, I think the board needs to go before you can claim a victory on woke capitalism, because if they would have supported that as well.
We're working on that, Michael. Come on, give me time. We're working on that, mate. But Cameron, part of your consultancy work is giving a little bit of crisis management and tough love to executives who seek out your excellent advice. You must have looked at that interview and thought, who the hell told him this was a great idea?
What a train wreck, what a train wreck. But Banducci is so arrogant. I mean, he wants to take Woolworths woke while celebrating his customers going broke. I mean, this guy basically, on the day the gouging inquiry was announced, went out and cancelled Australia Day. That was his response. Coles slashed chicken and meat by 20% and a whole range of other grocery items. That was their response. But he cancelled Australia Day. So, look, I'm glad he's gone, and I'm really hoping that Woolworths comes back to being a grocery store that looks after customers.
Mm.
Yeah, he was boasting that the fuss about the Australia Day thing didn't hurt sales, but I think it cost them. It was like, the one shoe falls. The next time you stuff up, well, he did. And so, bang, there's no love for him. And you heard the shopper say she didn't like the politics, so beware.
Exactly.
Michael, the news today, real wages over the year are up by 0.1%. Is the government now out of a hole and sunshine ahead, happy days?
Oh, not at all, Andrew. I mean, look, that was a good number. You can't deny that. You'd rather have it where it is than the alternative.
Oh, yes.
However, you've got to remember, I mean, when you drill down, you see a lot of this is due to public sector wages and, the Fair Work Commission cases on minimum wages. Now, all of that's good, except the issue here is, for me, productivity. Unless I see an alignment between the productivity figures and real wages, they're not sustainable. And, it's easier to get public sector wages up because you're using other people's money and you don't care about productivity. In the private sector, it's much harder. And if it's in the non-regulated component of the private sector, that we've really got to look to see what's happening to wages, or else, we're going to have real problems with productivity going forward.
Yeah, you described another Anthony Albanese Taylor Swift tickets scam. As you say, it's very easy to bump up wages if you're in charge of the government purse strings and hand over fist the public servants. Mind you, the state government's doing exactly the same, the Labor ones. Cameron Milner, what do you make of where this economy is going? Yes, a rise in real wages is good, but the rest of it, I'm not sure.
Well, it's 0.1%, so it's a very small increase. No doubt a good increase. But people are suffering a genuine cost of living crisis. I mean, there's 12 interest rate rises. Rents have gone up. Electricity's gone up. Petrol's gone up. Everything's gone up. And real wages have gone up by 0.1%. Well, I'm expecting Anthony Albanese to sort of say, everything's okay now. No cost of living crisis all over. That's, of course, poppycock, because people are living a real cost of living crisis, and the 0.1%, though good statistically, isn't the reality on the ground for so many families who are suffering out there.
Cameron, let me stay with you for a sec, because you're a good Queensland boy. To another shock resignation, you're part of the world. Queensland Police Commissioner Katarina Carroll has resigned. Another shock resignation, really, because the government's the policeman was hoping and thinking that he could keep her on. She's resigned after months of controversy about Queensland's youth crime crisis. Now, the left-wing guard of Australia says, she's a scapegoat for Queensland's anxieties about the crime. Not about the crime itself, just the anxieties about the crime. How do you see it?
Well, not a moment too soon. She had to go, and I'm really glad that she's gone. I can't take the fact that she actually rang in her resignation from the Qantas Chairman's Lounge, I might add. So that was how she resigned. But no, look, youth crime is a genuine issue. We had a grandmother of 70 murdered in front of her 6-year-old grandchild. Disgusting, on her watch as the police commissioner. But worse than that, we had a commission of inquiry into domestic violence which said there was a failure of leadership at the top. Domestic violence, which regrettably More women than men suffer, and it was on her watch that inquiry happened, and it was her leadership that was questioned, and she didn't have the decency to resign then. Thank goodness she's had the decency to resign now.
Although, of course, a lot of this, like the bail laws, are about the Queensland government rather than the police. Michael Costa, you were a former police minister. What do you make of this?
Well, and I also had to get rid of a police commissioner. And look, I think the politicians have got a responsibility here. And we did have to change bail laws as well while I was there, against some resistance from the civil liberties lobby. Look, obviously, once you lose the rank and file as commissioner, you got to go. And she's obviously lost the rank and file over that driving incident where she suspended a police officer. So it was not, she was only short term in any event. But I still worry about the fact the government's not taking responsibility for the laws and is not taking responsibility in terms of the police minister for his management of the police commissioner, because it's a two-way street there. And so I don't think the government's off the hook up there.
No, but it's very handy for them that she takes the blame and is the scapegoat. In the case you're referring to, yes, she did suspend a police officer, I think it was a sergeant, for authorising a car be rammed by a police vehicle to stop it, filled with alleged young offenders. So, yeah, I thought that was a bit rough. Michael Costa, Cameron Milner, thank you to you both. Every top executive actually should be studying Banducci's disastrous interview with Four Corners this week to learn what not to do. I suspect it's going to be on every show reel in every training session. How the most clever executives make the most basic mistakes, and usually out of sheer arrogance, right? Joining me is Sophie Ellsworth, media writer of the Australian newspaper. Sophie, I will guarantee that at least some of Banducci's top advisors told him, do not do this interview with the ABC. And I would say, especially do not do a pre-recorded interview where the interviewer can goad you and ask you the same question half a dozen times until you finally lose it and bang, and that's what goes to air. The rest, no matter how brilliant you were, does not. Why do you think he did it?
Well, I think, as we know, Andrew, the supermarkets are in the firing line at the moment. They're almost like the airlines were. It was all about Alan Joyce last year and the failures with Qantas, and now the heat is on the supermarkets. But let's be clear here, Andrew. Brad Banducci is not a new kid on the block. He's been the CEO of Woolworths for 8 odd years. He's very experienced in front of the media. If I was his media advisor, I'd be pulling him aside and giving him a stern talking to, because that was absolutely appalling performance by him. He got totally rattled, Andrew. He wanted, as part of the video edited, he was recorded requesting that. I mean, he's just playing into the journalist's hands. And credit to Angus Grigg from the ABC, because he kept his composure. He was very polite from what we saw in that grab. And Brad Banducci, who would have thought he got hot under the collar over remarks of Rod Sims? It was just astounding to watch. And as you said, I think every comms person in the country will be watching this, Qantas and the Optus CEO, and going, do not do anything that they do, because they've all gone and they've all had atrocious media performances, Andrew.
You're quite right to pick up that mistake. I mean, the camera is on, it's on, it's on. And if you think, oh, listen, what I'm just about to say, you won't use that. Don't use this bit. I mean, seriously, that's like putting a red flag. Use exactly this bit. I mean, it's just so stupid. The idea, too, that you could browbeat a journalist into not using the best bit that he's got so far. Honestly, rookie errors. Look, maybe he didn't have a good sleep that night. I don't know. But what do you make of it? I mean, is it arrogance, or is it the fact that he just had a bad day? I don't know. What do you make of it?
I think probably what's happened, Andrew, now I don't know, but often in these situations they are filmed for, sometimes it can be hours. So they get tired. I mean, you're sitting under hot lights, you're being grilled. But he is experienced. He should know how to handle it. Keep your cool. If the journalist is probing you and you're getting a bit frustrated, just keep your composure. And for heaven's sake, don't say, oh, can you cut out that bad bit? No, I shouldn't have said that shocking bit. I mean, alarm bells, disclaimer, you know, this is the bit that the journalist will immediately jump on. I just don't know what his comms team were telling him beforehand. And perhaps he was so arrogant he thought, I can handle this and watch me go.
I think you might have put your finger on it right there. And a little word of advice to executives. If you think you're going to get filleted, but you do think you need to go on and put your case to air, ask for a live interview. It only lasts about that long. It's less flexible, and they can't edit what you say, and you can filibuster as well. You go talk, and hope that they run out of time. The RMIT's fact-checking unit has had a disaster, Sophie. I've talked about this outfit before, I think, with you. It's been led by Russell Skelton, the husband of an ABC presenter, and it's been contracted as a fact-checker by both Meta, owner of Facebook, to check Facebook posts, and for some reason by the ABC. It's as left-wing as the ABC, so it's a total love-in. For instance, in one 7-week period we discussed before, up to June 23, Skelton's Fact Lab, RMIT Fact Lab, targeted 17 opinions or views that were against Labor's voice, but didn't check a single fake claim of the yes side. And now, Sophie, it's been hit by some hard facts of its own. Hard facts that go right to its hip pocket. Tell us about it.
Well, that's right, Andrew. So ABC were in cahoots with RMI Fact Lab. They were giving them funding to basically help do these fact checks. Now, they've parted ways with RMI Fact Lab, or they are going to part ways with them. Andrew, this was a disaster. This was such a partisan outfit, like you said, that just focused on agendas. It focused heavily on the No campaign and basically said everything they were pushing out was false. Very rarely did that with the Yes campaign. Well, that backfired. You had Russell Skelton, a very experienced journalist, heading up the Fact Lab and the Fact Check divisions. He was retweeting posts by Linda Burney, pro-voice posts. I mean, what on earth was going on there? And then you had staff at the ABC also endorsing these partisan views. Look, it was a partisan outfit from the day dot, and I don't think many people will be sad to see it go, but the ABC is setting up in replace their own Verify unit. So let's see, there'll probably be more jobs over at the ABC if you're looking for one.
Well, there you wiped the grin right off my face. Frying pan, meet fire. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much indeed for your time. After the break, this is a real change in tone. I'm going to show you the warning that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny filmed 2 years before his shocking death this week, a death that he predicted, and telling us what we should do if he was indeed murdered by President Vladimir Putin. And we'll talk about Putin's new weapon, nuclear bombs in space. What on earth is he up to? Has Russian President Vladimir Putin finally gone too far even for Russians? I mean, killing his critics. He's been at it for ages, actually, and warning, this is distressing, and it should be. Putin has had many journalists shot under his watch, or maybe they're just unlucky. Rival politicians also shot dead as well, like Boris Nemtsov. Putin has without doubt also had political dissidents like Litvinenko poisoned, while business critics fall mysteriously out of windows of tall buildings, so many of them. And the plane of military leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was last year blown out of the sky by a bomb, quite deliberately, after he challenged Putin once too often. And Putin has so far got away with it all. But the death now of Alexei Navalny, I wonder, has Putin crossed the red line? I think I was probably hoping more than expecting. Navalny was the Russian opposition leader who Putin's agents first poisoned his underpants, even admitted it in a phone call that was taped and leaked. German doctors luckily saved him, but then Putin had Navalny jailed in a Siberian cell, and now he's died of a heart attack, says Putin's government. But Navalny's widow, Yulia, says he was poisoned yet again. Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired 4-star general who serves as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, great to catch up with you. If Putin did have Navalny murdered, The question is, what does that tell us about how Putin's feeling and how his regime is travelling? This is what Navalny himself said it would mean in a film recently shot of him.
Не надо, нельзя сдаваться. Если это произошло, это означает, что мы необыкновенно сильны в этот момент, раз они решили меня убить.
So what, General, do you think the death means?
Yeah, well, I think what's happening here is Putin systematically has removed his opposition. And he knew Navalny certainly had a significant following, particularly in social media. But Putin, what it demonstrates to me is his paranoia and insecurity that Putin really has. You know, he's in power 24 years. He's going to get another 6 years in March as a result of a fraudulent election. But he still doesn't want any opposition at all. And what is the reason for that? Like other dictators, particularly President Xi, the mullahs in Iran, he fears his own people. And he doesn't want anything that will galvanize them in opposition to himself. So he goes way out of his way to ensure that doesn't happen, even though it was very unlikely to happen because of how much Putin is controlling, one, a fraudulent election, and two, not permitting protests of any consequence, since he has organized over 100,000 of the National Guard to stop protests immediately when they begin. And by the way, so our audience understands, this past week they have been arresting people simply for putting flowers in certain places in honor of Navalny, and they've been whisked off to jail by his thugs. They don't want anything to start like he saw in 2011, fraudulent election, hundreds of thousands of people in the street demonstrating against him. He learned that lesson, and that is why he so systematically eliminates his opposition, but also makes certain that the people are not in a position to demonstrate in any consequential manner whatsoever. And it's the other reason why he feeds them state propaganda 24/7. And by and large, the Russian people are still supporting Putin, despite challenges he's had with the war, despite the economy that's in the tank, and despite the fact that, Andrew, just recently he's gone to a war-footing economy, and he's spending 9% of his GDP on defense at the expense of the Russian people. They're putting up with all of that, sadly to say.
I know. I was hoping, I see that Joe Biden, the president, is putting on extra sanctions on Russia after the death of Navalny, but I don't know what more sanctions will do. The ones so far haven't done already. So he seems to be getting away with it, General. It is it's a real indictment of the Russian culture, I've got to say, the Russian society that he does. Meanwhile, President Biden's also getting Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to talk to India and to China about new weapons. Russia is said to be developing nuclear weapons now in space. Now, how serious are these weapons, and what do you think Biden wants China to do about it?
Yeah, well, I've had some pretty good sources on this, and yes, Russia is developing a nuclear capability to put it in space to blind the satellites if they set that bomb off. So our audience understands, in the early 1960s, the United States first and Russia second both detonated nuclear weapons in space just to see and understand what the impact would be detonating something in low orbit as opposed to on Earth. As a result of that, they joined a treaty together almost immediately following that in '63, and then in '67, they formalized a treaty to ban using nuclear weapons in space. Here's what I think Russia's really up to. Number one, they have the capability, but they haven't deployed it in space. I think Putin wants this as leverage to use to curb U.S. behavior, leverage to use in negotiations. And why do I say that? Because it's already been successful for them. They have been brandishing the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine for 2 years. That has forced the Biden administration to fear that escalation, and it forced them not to give the Ukraine the weapons that they wanted, advanced weapons in sufficient quantity in a timely manner. The Europeans, who finally figured it out that Putin was not serious about it, because as we escalated ourselves in advanced weapons, they did nothing about it. They pushed the tanks on America. They pushed the long-range missiles on America. This is the Europeans forcing the Biden administration, and they forced the F-16s. I believe Putin knows when he has the threat of deploying that weapon even, that he has leverage, and I think he will use it. The United States will likely not deploy a nuclear weapon into space that would blind our own satellites, not just Russian or Chinese satellites, and the satellites of our allies. It's not something the United States is going to take on. And Russia certainly knows full well that if they detonated that nuclear weapon that they deployed, that would impact China and blind them as well as their other allies. And believe me, the reason why they're talking to China and India is for that reason. China, who has advanced capabilities beyond the United States in space. We have led with space exploration, to be sure. China wants to do a lot of that themselves. But in terms of satellites, hypersonic glide vehicles, and other devices, and very close to weaponizing space, China doesn't want any part of Russia deploying a nuclear weapon in space, or certainly detonating something like that. So, yes, we should be talking to China about it. I think China gets it themselves without us actually talking to them about it.
Well, that's fascinating. That's the first sign of a potential split in China's support for Russia that we've seen, or a serious one. So, well, your analysis, very much hoping that is correct. Sounds right. Hope it's right. Jack Keane, General Jack Keane, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Yeah, always good talking to you, Andrew. Thank you.
And just the information coming in about how Alexei Navalny might have died, the dissident group Gulago.net is saying, it said last week, cameras had been dismantled at this prison that Navalny was being held in. How about that? That's convenient. And it says that the bruising on his chest that the local hospital said that seemed to have been caused by heart massage to try and get him back alive. It's actually consistent with the KGB technique. He'd been held outside for a couple of hours, very, very cold temperatures, being northern Siberia, and then the KGB apparently, or the successors, have a technique, punch directly in the chest when you're very, 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 very cold, and that will kill you. Who knows? I'm just telling you what is being reported. After the break, a poll calls Donald Trump the worst United States president ever. The media has loved this poll, but there's something very dodgy about it. I'll talk to Trump's former spokesman on that, and the alleged sex scandal involving one of the prosecutors trying to nail Donald Trump for election fraud. Trump derangement syndrome again. Donald Trump was the very worst of all the United States presidents that ever lived, if you believe a poll of 154 presidential historians. And I wonder whether you actually should. Because, all right, yes, these historians did say that the best president was Abraham Lincoln, tick, but then said the left-wing do-nothing Barack Obama was the 7th best ever, even ahead of Eisenhower, Lyndon Johnson, the underestimated one. But even sillier is that these historians put Joe Biden, who is battling senility and inflation, who has let in 3 million illegal immigrants, put in 1 year, mind you, they've rated him as 14th best president, 2 places above Ronald Reagan, who merely helped to end the Cold War. I mean, seriously? Joining me is Sean Spicer, the first White House spokesman for President Donald Trump. Sean Spicer, great to see you again. Donald Trump, the worst US president ever. Do you believe that?
I wonder, I've heard about grading on a curve, and that's usually the opposite when you get a C or a D, as I did a few of those. and they bump you up a little. But the idea of having the record that he had both domestically and internationally, I mean, just stop for a moment and think about that. Domestically, that we were tranquil. Vladimir Putin wasn't on the ascent. He was actually the first administration, gosh, in what, 4 or 5, that Putin didn't annex land or go to war with a former territory during Donald Trump. China, Taiwan, North Korea, Iran, they were all at bay. That was a pretty good record. And then obviously domestically, our border was secure. We were energy independent. Unemployment was lowest for key groups of society at record levels, whether it was women or African Americans, veterans, young people. I kind of wonder how these guys grade. I wouldn't want to take a class from any of them.
Yes, and I'd also add to your list the Abraham Accords, where you had Muslim countries in the Middle East actually signing peace deals and cooperation deals with Israel, which, boy, are we some distance from that now. And then again, these same judges put Joe Biden as the 14th best president, 2 ahead of even Ronald Reagan. I mean, what does that tell you about all these presidential historians that said, yep, that's the list?
It does make you wonder, though, I mean, what the criteria is. Andrew, it's funny. I often will ask Biden supporters when I'm debating them or just having a conversation, name me one thing that you're proud of that he did. One thing. And a lot of them will immediately turn around and start going after Donald Trump and say, well, Trump. And I said, no, you can't answer the question with Trump. What are you proud of that Biden has done on any front in the last 3 years? And again, they will usually resort to talking about Donald Trump and he's a horrible person and da-da-da, we can't go backwards. And the point is that the most ardent Biden supporters have a hard time thinking of something that he's done well. The southern border's way open, inflation's high, record interest rates are through the roof. Our foreign policy is a mess. It began by a botched withdrawal from Afghanistan that Putin himself has pointed to as a reason, or one of the reasons that he went after land in Ukraine. So I wonder, how do you grade like that? That takes grading on a curve to a whole new level.
Mind you, Sean, when you say that, of course, it makes me think again, if only Donald Trump would say less, get off the stage, and I know it's not in his nature, get off the stage and let all the attention go on Joe Biden, he would romp it in. He doesn't need to do anything, and yet he keeps making himself the centre of attention. Make it on Biden. I don't know why he doesn't do that. But listen, meanwhile, the persecution of Donald Trump, and I guess this is one of the reasons he does speak, because he gets persecuted, is getting even more pathetic. As we've discussed, it's been charged now with, what is it, Sean, 93 different offences so far, all by various Democrat officials.
Including... Once you hit 90, you just keep going.
Yeah, but the other 3, it's those last 3 that count, Sean. 93 different offences. They've all been lodged by various Democrat officials. This is very party political, including Fannie Williams, who's the Fulton County District Attorney. And she's charged with trying to overturn the presidential election vote in Georgia. Now, Willis got her job by attacking her then rival for that DA job like this.
They deserve a DA that won't have sex with his employees, because they deserve a DA that won't put money in their own pocket when it should go to benefit children, because we deserve better.
Yeah, but that's the Fannie Williams now who's prosecuting Donald Trump. Tell us, Sean, if she actually lived up to this noble promise not to sleep with her employees or put any money in her own pocket. And why does this matter?
Well, it's funny. The other day on cable television here in the United States, that the motion, I guess I'm not a lawyer, but the motion regarding whether she had acted inappropriately was wall-to-wall cable news. And there's 2 things that the audience needs to understand. So she hired a gentleman, Nathan Wade, who frankly didn't have any prosecutorial experience, but she hired him to help with prosecutions in her office, and ultimately that became some of the Trump-related cases. The problem is that there's a question about when and if she began a relationship. And even as a non-lawyer, I've asked lawyers on my podcast over the last couple of weeks, like, what difference does it make? I mean, if you're their boss and you're directing them, Does it matter if you started sleeping with them a couple weeks or months before you hired them or a couple weeks afterwards? And generally speaking, the answer is no. It shouldn't matter at all. It's unethical in either scenario. The second issue is, you know, he collected over $600,000, this Nathan Wade, in fees that Fulton County has paid him. Then they would go on trips that he would pay for, you know, cruises, Caribbean trips, etc. And then she would, quote, pay him back in cash that we're talking to the tune of, you know, several $100s per time, if not thousands, that he then says, you know, well, I have no record of. And again, that gets back to this idea of, did she financially benefit? She's hiring him. He's charging these fees to the county in Georgia, Fulton County. And then is she materially benefiting because he's taking her on these cruises and wine tastings and trips, etc.?
Look, it's just, honestly, Sean, I mean, if you know, all these DAs put enough attention into her like they're putting onto Trump, yeah, who wouldn't escape whipping, you know?
The whole thing, though, Andrew, it was hysterical listening to the conversation, because these folks on the left here in America are so progressive that you know, the gender and pronouns, and yet she started talking about the reason that she kept so much cash lying around to the tune of thousands of dollars is because, quote, it's a black thing. And then when she was asked about when the relationship began, she said, well, it's a woman thing to know when it did. Men think differently. I just found it interesting that when it's okay to play the race and gender card when it works to your advantage as a progressive, but God forbid, you know, that when that's not happening, you call out everybody else, making sure that the proper use of pronouns are in place.
What a bunch of stinking hypocrites. Sean Spicer, thank you so much for your time.
Always good to be with you, Andrew.
Honestly, the prosecutors in America, oh my God. Anyway, after the break, more shocking scenes of Jews being persecuted, this time in Melbourne, and how the police react is disturbing. I'm finding this anti-Semitism here really hard to take. I mean, it is so shocking to see Jews being persecuted in Australian streets, to see my Jewish friends frightened for their own safety and for their children's. I'll show you the latest example, and our Victoria Police at work. Melbourne City Council last night debated a motion calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, which would effectively be a win for the Hamas terrorist group. Foreign Affairs is actually no business of the council. Thank God they actually rejected the motion. But a mob of pro-Palestinian protesters, angry and abusive, turned up to apparently intimidate the council. A couple of Jews tried to get through. They wanted to see the debate and watch what happened to them.
We continue to commit this genocide against the Palestinians of Gaza using Australian weapons. As reported by anti-Semitic on November last year, Australia 350 these nations. No, I wasn't.
You touch me.
Keep walking with me. Thank you. You do not. I have a ticket. We will discuss this in a moment, sir. You are breaching the peace. I am not. You are breaching the peace.
We actually have tickets to go to the town hall to hear our community talk.
Joining me is the panel, Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, and late debate host Caleb Bond. Daniel, what does that scene tell you, where it's the Jewish man who's marched off by police for allegedly inciting, inflaming a mob to act like barbarians, I mean, seriously, what on earth is going on?
Well, I mean, this should never happen in a country like Australia, Andrew, and I think a lot of Australians will be looking at that footage with deep reservations and concerns about what is going on our streets. And reading one of the media reports in the Herald Sun this evening, it had a police spokesperson say that they were concerned about simmering tension between rival groups. And I was thinking, well, why do we have rival groups in our country? We're all Australians. We should all be signed up to the same set of values, which is tolerance, to have peace on our streets, to allow people to live out their lives as they see fit. That is the foundation of our way of life. And what we've been seeing, Andrew, over the past months on our streets in our major cities has been a fracturing of our society. And a lot of Australians will look at that and say, this just isn't the country that they recognise anymore.
Rival groups, Caleb, what, about a handful on one side, dozens on the other. Shame on them. People that act in a pack. And of course, it's easy for the police to police the few rather than the many. And so it seems to me the people that look more like the victims here, they get arrested.
Indeed, it's the easy way out, isn't it? And we saw at the end of that clip the police saying to that gentleman that he had breached the peace. Now, I didn't see anything there that he did that breached the peace. It was the protesters who were breaching the peace. You have the right to peaceful protest in this country, and long may that continue. But at the point at which you are assaulting another person, the point at which you are trying to prevent someone from participating in democracy, which is what he was trying to do. He was trying to go into the council chamber, pushing someone over. You are the person breaching the peace. It's actually so anti-democratic, which goes against the idea of why you should be able to protest in the first place, to do that. For the police to uphold that and treat him as though he were the aggressor is an unfortunate indictment on the state of this conflict and the way we've treated it in this country, where we simply say, OK, well, if a lot of you want to gather, we're not going to do anything about it. It started on October the 8th or 9th on the steps of the Opera House. We didn't stop that, and it sent a signal that they have used ever since.
Yep. Look, to breach the peace, there's got to be a peace to start with. I didn't see it. And I tell you what, a week or two ago, I had a couple on my show saying they'd been arrested or threatened with arrest for inciting a mob by wearing Australian hats, flags on their hats, a pro-Palestinian mob. The police said, oh, no, completely wrong, but they didn't have it on tape. This is on tape. And suddenly I think that story that they denied before is looking a lot more likely. Daniel, I said at the top of the show about the latest figures, our real wages up, just. Standard of living, though, down. How are we going to turn that around?
Well, Andrew, there's a big issue here. There's been a lot of data out lately that has shown our living standards are going back in a very dramatic way. In the Australian Financial Review today, there was analysis of the latest data showing that our living standards are back to where they were in 2017. That shows that alarm bells should be ringing on this issue. And Andrew, as we know, the only growth strategy that this government has is population growth underpinned by mass migration. Our analysis shows that last year was the first year in our nation's history where more than 1 million migrants came to our nation. Now, you can hardly blame the migrants for coming here because we're a great country and they want to be able to get ahead, and that's fair enough. But there's been a lack of planning. The pressure on our schools, roads, hospitals and housing is immense. And what it means is that, yes, the overall pie gets bigger, the economy gets bigger, but when you look at the figures, it's the per capita growth that matters, because that measures the slice of the pie that you and I are getting and the person on the street is getting, and that continues to go backwards.
It's small. Absolutely. Caleb, I'm out of time, but I wanted to quickly hit you with this one, because I think I've seen peak woke. I know you're a connoisseur of wokedom. The New Scientist magazine just published this extraordinary article. Is it time for a more subtle view of the ultimate taboo, cannibalism? And it has this line to explain why cannibalism is considered so wrong. Maybe it is culturally ingrained with roots in early modern colonialism, when racist stereotypes of the cannibal were concocted to justify subjection. Is that all it is, Caleb? Whites hate cannibalism, push stereotypes about it to justify keeping black people under white control?
I mean, that's just sick moral relativism, isn't it? I mean, next thing they'll be saying that, you know, female genital mutilation, we should take a more subtle view on that because that's okay in some cultures, or throwing gay people off the top of buildings, that's okay in some cultures, so we take a subtle view. I don't think they'll say that.
No, they certainly won't. Daniel Wild, Caleb Bond, thank you both so much for your time. That's it from me. Coming up next is Sherry Marks, and hang on, because she actually is talking to the Jewish man who was arrested in that disgusting clip you just saw. Good night.